me without you. You are my dream. You're what dreams are made for. You are my dream. We're a three-strand cord.
Yeah. Can you feel the rhythm of the soul? That's the heartbeats, let's go. Dive in with its riches untold. Let the greatest love story unfold. And yeah, all I know, I can't fall back. God pinned the format, officiated the first wedding and all that. So I'm all strapped with love stories that recall back times we made it to the light when it looked all black. Hashtag relationship goals. Let's go where God wants us to go. We ain't gotta drive, it's just score that's outside. In His grace we can fly, there's really no downside. Can we dance to His heartbeat? Be quiet when His heart speaks. Come on, be honest when our heart meets. As we listen to our heartbeats.
You are my dream. There's no me without you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Heartbeats podcast. I'm your host, Ruth Kogan, and I want to thank you all for joining us on the podcast all about love, specifically and most importantly, the love God has for us as demonstrated in how He brings two people together for marriage and how He's loving upon His singles. And today we get to meet my new friends, Steven and Brittany Pemberton. I say new because before this conversation, I had never met them before and we got no connections. And I have to say this was so fun for me just to jump right in and let's hear about your story. And they shared so openly and honestly with a heart of we want others to learn from the mistakes as well as the things that God has taught them through those mistakes. How He's grown their faith, how He's built them as a couple, and really with the heart of we want others to heal and to grow and be blessed by the work God has done in and through us. So as you listen to their story, pay attention to what is sticking out to you. Around here, we call that your heartbeat, which is what is God speaking to you as you hear and listen to their story. So God wants to use the body of believers. He wants to encourage each other through the testimonies, through our stories, to build our faith, encourage us, strengthen our hope in Him, maybe challenge us, maybe poke out an area in our life that we need to grow in. But it's all in the name of love. So afterwards, you will hear my heartbeat, which was what did I sense God speaking to me as I heard their story. Be sure to share your heartbeat with me. I want to hear it. All right, so let's get going and meet the Pembertons. All right, welcome Steven and Brittany to the Heartbeats podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited. I'm Steven, and this is my wife, Brittany.
Brittany, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to be on here.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited. You guys are my first official social media connection. So typically I've met with couples that I at least have either a small connection with or are like family or friends in some way. So I'm very, very excited to meet you all first time. And I know zero about your story other than the 2 seconds synopsis, which makes for a fun conversation. So I just want you all to introduce yourselves first. What should we know about Steven and Brittany?
So at least on my end, I'll go ahead and I'll start, is my wife and I are both entrepreneurs. And really how we got there, she's been an entrepreneur much longer than me. And I wasn't going to share it this way, but I feel that the Holy Spirit's leading it in a different way than I expected. And for me, what that looked like was in 2020, I quit my job. The Lord spoke to me. He told me to quit. And it was a job that I had built my life on, my identity on.
Wow.
And He called me out of it. Like I felt as if I audibly heard Him. And so when I left that job and I came home, there was this season of there's a season and point of our lives where I expected the business that she was already doing to be the thing that provided. And it wasn't. That ended up going away. And the Lord blessed us with another business that is what really carried us even up until this point. And that's why that I'm able to say that I'm an entrepreneur, is because of what the Lord did in that season. And that's a very short form of what happened. There's much more there, much more meat on the bones there. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, instead of just saying, you know, it's all been great. It actually hasn't all been great, but listening to the Holy Spirit and following in obedience where he led us and where he led me out of that job is why I'm even here. And I just wanted to honor my wife with that, because she led the charge. And she has been the one that's been out ahead. She's been the one who prayed down heaven for me to take over as the spiritual head of our house. So that's who I am. Who are you?
Yeah. Well,
that was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have a son. He is 8 years old. We got married young and quickly ended up with our son soon after that. So we have that little boy in there hanging out watching Bluey. And then so I am also an entrepreneur. I kind of started the business with his mom like 3-4 years ago. And whenever we started, I did start with the intent of bringing him home, him being an entrepreneur, because he was in this very heavy physical job that was working him 16, 18, 20 hours a day. So I wanted to start whenever we started in e-com, and I had that goal in mind. So I see myself as really ambitious. If I have a vessel to put something into, I get laser focused on that thing. So that is something that I love doing, is just getting laser focused on a mission or a goal that I'm going after.
That's amazing. Do you guys mind sharing what's the businesses that you all are pursuing and running?
Yeah, we used to have an e-commerce business. So we started out on Amazon. We were selling all the big name brands. We were doing wholesale, all of that stuff. We did pretty well with that. We made it to 7 figures in that.
Nice.
But it was really small margins and it was hard to keep up. Then eventually some things happened and we lost that business actually, and then ended up kind of giving it up at the same time. And we ended up finding our way into another business because that business was over and it had left us with some debt because of Amazon. And we found our way into another business. That business, we both together scaled to 7 figures since he was home.
Right.
That one was also e-commerce. And right now it's kind of funny because at the beginning or March 2022, I forget what year we're in right now.
Right?
Yeah, 23. That's crazy.
It's very fresh. We're new into the year. March of 2022, God, I was in the shower and I felt it very firmly, clearly that God told me to shut this business down.
Wow.
And that was pretty much, we were doing pretty well in the business at that point. So whenever he told me to shut it down, I was terrified to come tell Steven.
Yeah.
And we agreed that we should follow the voice, we should follow what he's telling us to do. We shut it down and we kind of expected like this boomerang type thing where you give something up and you're immediately going to get something back. But kind of ever since then, really, he has just provided for us and just made us completely reliant on him every single month since then. And even at this point in time, since we moved to Tulsa, which was only 2 months ago, he was like, once you get to Tulsa, you're going to sit still, you're going to serve, and you're going to wait on my voice. And I was like, I don't know, God, if you know how this works, but you need money to like do this thing called life. So we have been sitting here ever since, waiting on his voice, serving every opportunity we can get. We set up the whole Christmas thing at our church, which took like 3 weeks, I think, almost 3 weeks.
Total time in was almost 40 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, to answer your question, we are sitting, we're waiting, we're serving at this moment.
And with that being said, thank you for sharing that, because the the people that we want to be whenever we get the opportunity to speak to anyone. So we always want to honor the host. Like, thank you so much for having us. Is
Sure.
we want to share the vulnerable side. For
Yep.
us, is we don't want to just share the victories. Like, very easily
Right.
we could have left out the part about us giving up the business. We could have very easily
Yeah.
left out the part that yes, made $1 million on Amazon, but the margins were like 10%. So we
Yep.
really didn't bring home anything.
Right.
So, but there's when there's authenticity, there's breakthrough.
Yep.
And this podcast is not for us. This podcast is for those listening.
Yep.
And with that being said, is there I just would be remiss if I didn't let people know that are listening that when you obey God, it may not be what you want to see. There's so many times where for us, when we're following the will of the Lord and he's leading us into new areas, that there is provision there, but it may not look the way that you want it to.
Right.
And when you are walking through the valley, when you're still walking through the fire, even when he's right there with you, there's that extra person with you. Are you okay with walking through the fire? So many people will sing that song, There's Another in the Fire.
Right.
But do you want to be in the fire?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
because when you're in the fire, there's a refining, there's a purifying that's happening, not only in your mind.
Painful.
And it's
really
yes, and it's
seriously
painful.
to go through
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Yep. And he's like, do you trust me to not only take you through, but you're going to come out through, you're refined as gold, right? As
Right.
is it silver or gold? It's gold, right? But you're purified and you're refined. And that's a beautiful process, because what's on the other side of it, you might not be ready for, or I might
Yeah.
not be ready for, right? And so he has to take us through that purification process. Okay, well, if this is how we started off, I'm excited to get into your actual story in life. And I'll just sort of preface by saying, season 2, we're focusing on redemptive challenges. And you've touched already on a little bit, but we're focusing on challenges that God takes us through, but seeing them through his lens, and how has he helped us either overcome them or walk us through. And so I know that your marriage, your story, your marriage is a testimony of that. So I just want to start, first of all, so we're going to kind of just get right into your story, and first hear about where were each of you at. We already know you were young, but where were each of you at before you actually met one another?
So both of us were in high school. And with that being said, it was and there's so many things that I look back on and realize that it was a move of God that I didn't realize in the moment that it was.
Right.
And what ended up happening, I was in high school. I was good at basketball, so I was playing basketball at the time. And my parents had given me a car, and I was young and dumb. So with that being said, as I got busted speeding, I was going 85 and a 55. And I get a speeding ticket. And so my parents, they weren't having it. So I had to go work a job. And honestly, that was the greatest moment of my life, because that's where I ended up meeting her. And I wouldn't have met her if it hadn't have been for a speeding ticket.
There you go.
So this thing that I looked at as bad ended up being the greatest gift that God gave me. But that's where I was before. I was just in high school. I was a senior in high school. And my plans did not go the way I expected. It was not his will. His will was for me to get a speeding ticket that night.
Did you lose the car? Were your parents like, and you lose that car as well?
No, I didn't lose the car, but I had to pay for everything after that moment.
I guess you had to have the car to get to work.
And
Right,
get to
well,
work
true.
in school. Yeah.
True. Now, my oldest nephew has his license now, and so I know from my sister's vantage point, there is benefits to having your children start to drive. So I'm sure they were like, oh, all right, so now you pay for it. We can't take the car away, but you pay for it. So, okay. So Brittany, what was happening with you?
For me, before I met him, I had just kind of started the journey where, so my world kind of goes back to, whenever I think of that, goes back to middle school. That's when my parents split up and everything kind of changed in my life from that point forward. Like, we were very secure in our finances. We lived in the same house my whole childhood. Everything was good until that point.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of after that point, my mom and I lived in a lot of different houses together. Once they split up, she wasn't very financially, she didn't have it together. She was just by herself trying to figure it out. So by the time I turned 16, since we're talking about cars, I got this old hand-me-down of my sister's, and I just remember so vividly like driving home from school, and there was this big hill you would drive down, and I would just coast down that hill because my car would overheat before I could get to my friend's house, who was like 3 minutes away. And it just so happened his dad was like really good with cars, or at least, you know, kind of like duct taping
Right,
something
right.
together to make it work. That's what it felt like. So at this point in time, I was like, I'm going to work any job I can to be able to buy myself a car. So like my junior year, my senior year, I basically just worked all the way through. Every night I was at work all summer. I had a morning job and then I had an evening job. So I'd be off for like an hour. I'd eat, I'd shower because I wanted to like look good going to work at the movie theater. There was a cute guy there. And I was just trying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying my best just to get this car. Like I had that dream of I just got to get the car. So I was kind of in that motion. And at the same time, I wasn't in contact with my dad a lot. So I had developed this thing where I was kind of just like bouncing around between, you know, relationships, just trying to find something that fit. And I got extremely fortunate that God was like, okay, no. And then finally placed me. It feels like now, whenever I look back, he placed me in something that could, like, whenever I look back at all of the other ones, I don't look at their lives now, but if they stayed on the same trajectory they were on, then I know that they are not in a good place at this point. Right. And they don't look like him either. They're not as good looking as him either.
Thank you. But I think that there's such a powerful story of how I actually met her, because I typically tell the funny part where when I first get hired on, they're walking me around me with the with the rest of the new employees, and we go into the concession stand, and the person who is over us, he says, "So this is a concession stand. This is where you'll be. Don't listen to her." So she's walking by her, and as she was walking by, she says, "Move it." And I said, "Whoa, yeah, you're right. Maybe I shouldn't listen to her. She kind of mean." And
I deny it every
time. She denies it every time.
Even though I was very bold and assertive then, like I was a work in progress.
But there's a redemptive story even in that, because I remember I got trained that night, and the person who trained me had never trained anyone before, and he did a terrible job.
And I think he quit. Like
he quit the next day. No, he quit the next day.
Oh,
so he trained me and then quit. And Matthew, if you hear this, I love you, brother. I've only ever talked to you that one time, but you didn't do great. But you know, there's redemption in the name of Jesus. But,
yes, thank you for doing a poor job at the time.
Because what ended up happening was he didn't let me actually experience how to run this cash register. So if you don't know how to run a point of sale or a POS, then you're in for a long night. Right. So the very next time that I'm scheduled, they said, "Hey, do you know what you're doing?" And I said, "Maybe." And they said, "Okay, great. So here's your register." And so they put me on this cash register, and there's like a line out the door because I'm the only one, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I can't even get in this thing. And I just remember she comes up, Brittany comes up, and she asks if I need help, and I'm sweating bullets. I think I might be crying at the time. And so she comes up and she starts helping me. And I remember, and to preface this is I'm 18, she's 18. We're both making $7.25 an hour at this point. And I remember she's helping me, and I turn around, and I wasn't very close to the Lord at this time. There was some church hurt I went through at a younger age, so I was far away from the Lord. I was out of church. But when I turned and I looked at her, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, "That's your wife." And I know to most people, like, that's nuts. But we are evidence that this crazy faith thing actually works, because we've been together for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. We've been married for over 9. We're going to be 10 in August. And you just got to listen to that still small voice. I didn't understand what it was then, but now I know that was the Holy Spirit. And I just remember telling her that she was meant for great things. Now, again, you probably shouldn't take the advice of somebody making $7 an hour that you're meant for great things, but she just really held on to the fact that I was speaking into her. And in like that moment, I'll just never forget that moment. I'll never forget turning from the cash register, seeing her, and just knowing that this was going to be my wife at 18.
I have to back that up because And I ask this a lot because people will say like, oh, I heard God spoke to me. And I always, especially because, people who are either new in their faith or maybe don't consider themselves a Christian at all. When you say you heard the voice of God, for you, was that like an audible voice? Was it a knowing? Was it a clear thought in your head? How would you describe it if you can?
So for me, especially now in my faith walk, there's so many different ways that I hear the Lord.
Right.
But at this moment in time, it was in this moment when I turned and I saw her, it was this overwhelming feeling of just peace and
Like a
knowing,
knowing,
and it was a
yeah.
word. It was this word that's your wife. It was as if somebody had spoke it and just laid this word in my brain and then gave me peace in my heart. It was instantaneous. And that's how, like, at the time I didn't understand it because I'm
Sure.
18. Well, what do you mean? I'm single. Like, we're not dating. She was actually dating somebody else at the time. I was thinking, what do you mean? And
The first time he asked me out was in that concession stand, and he knew I was dating somebody at that time.
hey, but but that's how I heard the Lord in that moment. It was just this word, like it was laid in my soul that this is your wife, and there was peace at the same moment. And I don't know, and this is the thing when people get conflicted of, well, is this the Lord, is it not? I
Right.
wasn't 100% sure it was, but I just held on to it because I truly believed that whatever it was, because it was so radically different than what I'd ever
Yeah.
felt, never heard,
Yeah.
that I just wanted to give it a try. And
Mm.
so that's what I did. And that's where I pursued her. And once we started dating, we're still making $7.25 an hour. I saved up everything I possibly could to get her a ring. This was not, I had no game plan. I had no long-term vision. I just knew if whatever this was giving me this vision, this peace, that I was going to pursue. And then I was going to actively take steps towards wherever he was leading me.
Before we get to you, Brittany, because I got some questions for you, but you said, I gotta give it a try. I think that is such a beautiful, I've never heard it put that way, but I love how you said that, just in terms of that is the life of faith. I mean, it oftentimes, yeah, God does speak. And sometimes we're like, was that God? I mean, I'll look over my journals. I'm a big journaler, and I'll like read through and I'll be like, so I heard this today, or I thought this today. Is that God? Because this wasn't I wasn't thinking along those lines in the moment. And then all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
And the life of faith it's not a risk for God. He ain't risking nothing. But for us, there's you got to test that out. Like, take some steps on it. And what I'm sensing from you all is this is describing your all's life in general.
Yes.
But so Brittany, he has this thought did you think anything when you saw him, or what was sort of your process of saying no to your boyfriend at the time and being willing to date Steven?
Yeah, so at the time, that relationship with that boyfriend was already a thing where there was like rumors where the other person that he was dating before, that he still had things going on because she had also, like, he also worked at the movie theater before Steven worked there. And it was just like a thing where it was very close to the end anyways. And I just remember the first day he came in, me and one of my girlfriends that was working there with me, we were standing there. He was being hired with someone else. And I don't, for whatever reason, like, she picked one and I picked the other to train. Like, they were sitting far off and I was like, oh, I want to train that one. And she was like, I'm training that one. And then I was like, okay. And then I just looked at the other guy. I was like, I guess I'll take him. And we both thought they were both kind of cute. Well, the other one, he liked men. So that was a problem.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah. So whenever I remember the first day he told me like that he liked my hair. I had intentionally like curled my hair. You know how you do sometimes. You'll just do little things differently, just a little bit extra versus what you would typically do once you see someone that you're attracted to. So I remember that, and he told me he liked my hair, and I was like, kind of freaking out. I remember that very well.
So how did you all end up starting to actually date then? So to be clear, it sounds like there was some level of attraction to Steven.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So then how did you guys go from those initial moments to finally in a relationship of some kind?
I I remember early on, I think I got your number because I wanted to ask questions about the job and quotations. For those of you who can't see it, I did the quotations. But so I remember I was asking questions. I just asked you if you would go to Buffalo Wild Wings. That was the first thing, was Buffalo Wild Wings.
And that was while I was still in that, like at the very end of that other relationship. And as soon as this guy asked me, I was like, I got to find my way out of that other relationship because at that point in time, it was already so much going on. And like, because I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, like I was depending on those relationships to like hold me up. And I honestly entered into this relationship expecting it to hold me up too. Expecting like this affirmation, all these things from him to like make me feel whole in that moment.
Right.
But that's how it started, was a text message to Buffalo Wild Wings. That's how, and then what ended up happening is we didn't do that. You told me no. She told me no. And eventually I went to the movies again with the two other ladies that were at the movie theaters. They invited me, so I just went and watched this movie.
Yeah, he showed up with two other girls and I was like,
and she said, if they can get them, I could get them. And so and then after that moment, we started talking more. And then that's when we went to the movies for our first date too. Yeah. And we actually had the pictures of that somewhere. But that's how it started, was that first time when you just said yes. Yeah. Because I was already bugging you before, but when you finally said yes and we went to the movies together for that first time, that's when we started dating. And then we were both broke working at the movie theater. So every date was the movies.
Well, it's a cheap, date. I mean, in fairness, were you 18 at this time still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, fair enough. Okay, so you start dating, and what kind of happened along the way to get you to, engagement, married, all of that stuff? What were some key things in your relationship?
For me, what was very key was as soon as, and again, because this part of the story doesn't make a lot of sense to anybody, but once we first started dating, I was saving money. And I was already putting money aside because I'd already had this word the second time I met her that this was going to be my wife. So I was putting money aside. And so we started dating in about, I would say, March or April, probably around April of 20 forever ago. And
2012.
2012, yes, thank you.
I only know because we graduated that year.
Yeah, that's true. So I immediately start putting money aside, and then we were dating, and then fast forward to around December, I had saved up enough to get her an engagement ring. And I remember that conversation so well with my mom, because I told my mom, I don't know why, but whenever I get nervous, I'll like speak in code. And so I told my mom that I wanted to get Brittany a piece of jewelry, and she said, "Oh, like earrings or a necklace?" And I said, "No, I want to get her a ring."
She wanted to help him pick it out.
And so my mom just started crying. She's like, "No." I was 19 then. She's like, "You're 19. Like, how do you even know? You hadn't even dated her for a whole year." But I just knew. And so I went and I took my entire savings and I bought this ring. And so when I bought the ring, I took her to her birthday dinner. And I had this plans for this beautiful night. And funny enough, I was gonna ask her to marry me at this restaurant. Like I had a Groupon.
It had really nice. It was a nice restaurant though. It was.
Yes.
And then it had a really beautiful courtyard below it. We often go to it together. But right as we were sitting there at dinner, I'm facing the window because it's like a big wall of windows. There's the mountain landscape in the background because we grew up in Tennessee.
Yeah, we're in Tennessee.
And I'm looking down and I'm like, that guy is engaging to his girlfriend. Look.
She's like, "Oh my gosh, look." No.
And he told me later, he said that was the spot where I was supposed to ask you.
But it worked out so beautifully, because what ended up happening was there's this place in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's called Rock City. And during the Christmas time, so her birthday is December 17th. So around that time, they have the Enchanted Garden of Lights. And so what that is just this huge space where they have tons of Christmas lights. And that's where I was planning to take her after I had popped the question. But because I didn't have that opportunity, I took her there. And as we're walking along, there's a spot where you overlook, in this one spot in Rock City, you're supposed to be able to see, I think it's 7 states. So
Wow.
she's overlooking the city, and there's this huge waterfall. And as she's standing there overlooking the city, I get behind her and I get down on one knee. And then she turns around and I'm just right there. And I ask her this question. And that space and that place we went to every single year for years because it held such great sentimental value to us. But I do remember that. I remember sweating bullets the entire night. I typically don't talk about this, but I was sweating bullets the whole night. I had the ring hidden in my jacket. I was just hoping there wasn't a hole and it fell out, or I was just hoping I wasn't holding it and drop it, because we were right next to this waterfall. It would be gone. Like, there's no way.
And then we were like, I don't know, we were just like, you want to go get hot cocoa? And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, that is how that went. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So Brittany, how did you go from yeah, I want to date to yes, I want to marry you? You know, Steven had a word right away. But what was your process of like, yes, I want to marry you? Because did you all discuss this ahead of time, or Steven, you just popped it?
I don't think we really discussed it before.
I don't think so.
We didn't. If you know our whole story, you know we didn't do much right.
Oh yeah,
For the first
that's a fact.
4 years, 5 years, probably we didn't do. There was way more often that we did everything wrong in the textbook perspective, and that's why we always say that it's a miracle. It truly is a miracle that we are together today. But for me, I just remember something we love to do together that we actually don't talk about this much, but we love to cook together. Like we will find, all the best of everything, the best Pinterest pins and all the recipes. In fact, we just moved here, made some friends, and immediately on Christmas invited those friends over. And we had like a big Italian feast for Christmas.
Amazing.
So we just love cooking together. I remember we were dating. We'd get done with work at the movie theater at like 2, 3 a.m. We'd go back to my mom's house and we'd be cooking, and she'd come out yelling at us because she had to work the next morning because we were laughing so much. We were having so much fun. And I just remember we would have that's like the second location we would spend most of our time, was just at my mom's house. And we would just spend time kind of just hanging out, just talking all the time about all of our hopes, all of our dreams, and just enjoying each other and cooking, getting in lots of trouble doing that.
Yeah.
That's so cute. So at this point, you all get engaged in December. And Steven, where were you at in your faith at this point?
I was still not close to God.
Okay.
I was not. Now, for me, just a quick background was I grew up in church. I was a church baby. I was that little kid hiding under the pews and drawing on the bottom of them when he wasn't supposed to. Like, that was me. Yeah. And I grew up in Tennessee, so I grew up in the Bible Belt, and I grew up Southern Baptist. And there it is I knew of Jesus, but I saw no relationship. Pretty much every Sunday, my parents would fight about the message, to the point where we just stopped going to church altogether at certain points. And then I went through a phase when I was part of the youth group and I was on fire for God. And I was basically under the wing of the youth pastor. And I went on a missions trip, and God was moving in my life. He was telling me what my purpose was. And then one Wednesday, the youth pastor gets on stage and says, "Hey, I've been offered the associate pastor job, but I want to let you know that the Lord told me I'm supposed to be right here, and I'm going to stay right here with you guys." And then the very next day, he took the job. And so when that happened, I was so jaded. I was so jaded towards him in that moment, because I put my faith more in him than in God. And when this happened, it took total time, I would say almost 9 years to get me back in church. And I would say like 23, 24, so 8 to 9 years.
Until we moved to Texas. So that was, what year was that? 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
so we had been married almost 5 years. I had been, reading all the relationship books because we were doing everything wrong financially. So we were financially struggling. Oh, we were having arguments. He was working all the time. I hardly ever saw him. We weren't fulfilled. We almost split up so many times.
Yeah.
To a point where now that we have such a great relationship, we have one of our number one rule basically is never flash, never play Russian roulette, basically. Never flash the "I'm leaving" words, never say that in the relationship. Like, no matter how much we fight, which we really don't.
No, we really don't. But I remember, I want to go back real quick to this moment that she was talking about where, so I'm at this time when I get engaged, like for us, we were doing a lot wrong. There was not any boundaries. So we found out our son was coming along pretty early on, before we were actually married. We were engaged, but we weren't married.
Yeah.
And I remember very clearly there was a night where we had this big explosive fight. And I grew up with two parents where one was explosive, where she was just mad all the time. My mom was just like a firecracker. And then my dad was like a nuclear bomb. It took a while for him to blow up, excuse me. But when he did, it was big. Yeah. And so I grew up in this tension of anger. So when we had this big argument, I blew up. And when I blew up, she didn't feel safe. And I would love for you to share that, like the feelings that you felt then and why. Eventually, what it culminated into was her actually giving me the ring back.
Yeah. So that night, I still remember very vividly. So just kind of a flashback. My mom got remarried after the relationship with my dad, and she was with my stepdad for a while. He drank a lot, and whenever he drank, he got really physical with her. And I just remember one night I was laying in bed and I was just on my phone, just chilling, about to go to sleep. And I was in a basement bedroom. It was like, there was like a whole basement set up. And I just remember her, it sounded like she fell down the stairs, but I think she was just like running down the stairs. And I just came out of my room and I found him on top of her. So I'm trying to pull him off, and he just throws me into the wall. And I just remember I never stayed another night in that house. I went to live with friends after that. And she did too. She came with me that night, but then she eventually went back. So I just remember after seeing that firsthand, and that was just this big aha moment to me of, I will never have a relationship like this. So whenever I saw him slamming his fists on the bed, being mad in that moment, just screaming at the top of his lungs, I was like, I'm out.
Right.
I'm I'm not going to be with this person. I gave him the ring back. The next day, his mom calls and she kind of explains for him kind of this background of, this is how his dad is, but neither of them would ever touch you. They just have this anger where, they might hit a wall, but they would never hit you, kind of thing. And I didn't immediately take him back after that, but I remember this moment. My sister gave me this item, and I think we still have it today. And she was like, I was going to give this to you, but I know y'all are split up now, but here you go, kind of thing. And I took it and I opened it up, and it was like a picture of us. And I just know now, I didn't know what it was then, but I know now that as I looked at it, I was like, that's my person. I can't let this person go. So in that moment, just a few minutes later, I feel like it was probably just a few minutes later, I text him. He's like, hey, can we meet up? Can we talk? I talked him through what I was actually feeling in that moment, and we kind of repaired from there. And he didn't immediately understand because he was defensive. He was like, I would never hurt you. How could you think that?
Yep.
But now I know he definitely understands.
Yeah, I understand now. And that's why I wanted her to share that part, is because there's so much authenticity I didn't understand until she explained it to me years down the road. This was years later in our marriage when she explained that moment that she went through where her mom was getting physically beat and her getting thrown into a wall. And that was why when I acted the way I did in that moment, it triggered that. And so I completely understand why she did that. And I just know that the Lord truly worked through a picture. And this is where it's important for those of you listening. It's God doesn't have to audibly speak to still be working. There's things that he will work through. There's things that he'll say to you, even through looking in a picture or through a song or a smell that hits you or just a random piece that comes over you in the midst of trials that makes no sense, that is him in a moment. And it's about learning how to tap into where he is. And like, I'm so grateful to the Lord for giving me a word, but he basically gave her the same word through a picture. And that is what culminated into us getting married a few months later. We found out our son was coming. And so we sped up the wedding. And for her, she just got to, what was interesting about that whole wedding scene is she got to sit. And me, my mom and her mom, we just planned everything. Like we did it all. That way that she could just be calm. She could just sit. We could take care of the baby. And it wasn't a big elaborate wedding, but I would never change it. Like, even if with all the money that we had at the time, and like, no matter what it was, I would never go back and change it because it was beautiful. It was this intimate setting. And we still have pictures of it around our house. There's one right over there that I see behind this computer screen. And it just reminds us, yes, we were young, but we were meant to be together. And because God aligned us together, he kept us together. In the times and places and spaces where the enemy tried to use things to separate us, he made sure that we stayed together, that we stayed strong, even in the seasons where we were trying to destroy that thing, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm almost in tears, honestly, listening to you all, because I can relate so much to just a couple of things. Like one of the things you talked about was just how God spoke to you through a picture. I think I love what you all were saying about sometimes I think we overcomplicate sometimes the voice of God, right? And and he knows us so intimately. He knows us so us inside and out, that he knows what will speak to us and get a hold of us. And this is one reason why I'm so big on people sharing their own story, because stories help us understand our own story better sometimes. And we don't have to go through the exact same circumstances to be able to know. Because look, God has spoken to me through some of the most randomest objects, things. And you couldn't tell me otherwise. So I just think that's beautiful. And I really appreciate too, what I'm hearing is sometimes God calls something into being before it's beautiful. It's like he sees the beauty ahead. He's like, I know what I'm gonna do with Steven and Brittany. So just try. It doesn't always start off as, beautiful, everything amazing. And if it does, great, awesome, but sometimes things start off messy. But God is in the business of redemption. He's in the business of bringing beauty from ashes. And so he's kind of like, I'm going to call you two together, and I'm going to work through some of that mess and be glorified in it.
He sees the end from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the beginning from the end. Like both ways work, because what we saw was just that physical attraction. That's what we saw. But he saw a thriving marriage. He saw two people walking in faith, impacting other marriages, impacting other people. He saw things that we never saw. Yeah. He saw two people not completely healed, but getting healed.
We've never, even today, it's very rare that we find people that have the depth of the relationship that we have. The way that he cares for me is like wild. Like every morning I wake up to breakfast, I'm just like, I just basically have to compete. It's almost a competition of like, I have to keep up with him, the amount that he serves me.
Yeah, that's
and it's very, because when growing up, again, I grew up in church, and the Sundays where the pastor would talk about submission. Oh man, it was a fight all the way home. My mom, I'm never going to be submitted to no man. It's like, but you've been married for 20 years at that point. Yeah. Like, but it's because that gets taken out of context. Yeah. The way that I view that is, so Brittany is submitted to me, but that does not mean that she is voiceless. Does not mean that she is powerless. That does not mean that I have dominion over her. That's not how this works. Not
many pastors go to the next verse.
And the next verse is husbands, love your wife the way that Christ loves the church. Right. And it says Christ died for the church. And on top of that, if we look right before he died, he actually put himself in the position of a slave and washed the disciples' feet. So he actually made himself last, even though that he was first. So with that being said, is with her is yes, she is submitted to me, but every single day I want to love her the way that Christ loves the church. I want to serve her. I want to be able to cook for her, to clean for her, to make her feel loved. That's my goal each and every day, is to help her feel loved. And in turn, because she knows that I hear from the Lord, she submits to me when I say, hey, this is where I feel the Lord is taking us in 2022 and 2023. And in 2020, when the business went away, when I came back with a word that said, stay the course. And when it made no sense, we had nothing to stay the course. And she leaned on me in that moment, and we stayed the course, and he blessed us. So with that being said, is there's this beautiful picture that Christ gives us in the New Testament about how to have a thriving marriage. Wives, submit to your husband, but don't stop there. Husbands, love your wife the way that Christ loved the church, willing to die for her. Like that. And it's not just being a man and be like, yeah, well, if anyone ever breaks in my house, I'll just lay down my life for him. But in a real practical sense, is, are you laying down your life every day, your wants, your needs, your selfish ambitions for her needs?
Yeah.
And that is what I strive to do every day, because I remember a time and a place where I wasn't doing that. And that was for 3-4 years of our marriage, that it just wasn't great because of this backwards model that I was viewing back then.
That is beautiful. I want to call you Reverend Steve, from the pulpit. No, that's beautifully put. And I think that's one of the things, that gets easily misunderstood. That there is a beautiful, it's a one of my other couples from season 1 talked about a dance. And it's a beautiful dance. And that laying down of, I think, ladies, I ain't gonna lie, 2023 now, we're in 2023 now, but us ladies, we can easily be like Miss Independent. And there is something about when you are submitting, though, to a man who is submitted to the Lord, that's a different story. I would love to hear how you guys went from, Steven, you mentioned the first 3-4 years weren't great. How did you go? How did you all get out of that? Like, what happened that you all are where you are today and still growing?
I mean, really, I feel like it really all comes back to whenever he started working from home. And it's not just because he was working from home, but it was also because he was leaving the situation that seemed to cause all these troubles. He was leaving a situation where he was working all these hours. So he would work 16 to 18 hours a day in the summer, Monday through Friday, all the way into like 8 a.m. on Saturday. So all day Saturday, he's just resting, sleeping. And to me, I just had this struggle. And honestly, I was kind of selfish, but at the same time, I was just like basically suffocating because I never got to really spend time with him. Like 100% wasn't spending any time with him during the week. There was no option for that.
Nope.
And then on the weekend, I might get a little bit of Sunday, but I certainly wasn't going to get him up early enough to go to church because he was basically in a night shift kind of job.
Right.
So waking him up early, like that wasn't happening. That was one of the reasons why we weren't in church. And I just feel like whenever he came home, I would always listen to sermons on my computer while I was working. So whenever he came home, I just naturally did what I had already been doing. So I turned on one sermon, and it was Transformation Church. And after that, like, he loved Transformation Church. That's why we're here in Tulsa now, because God let us here. But whenever he started listening to that first one, he continued to listen to, like, we binged basically.
Yeah.
For the first month or two while you were home, we just binged.
Oh yeah.
And whenever we lost that business soon after he came home, and we were in all this debt, like, we had to follow the principles that we were hearing, the words that we were hearing from the pastor, until we started. And that's what we're super intentional about. Like, every single time there's a sermon, we're always intentional about, like, reflecting on it and making sure that we're actually doing what it's saying to do.
Right.
Like, just recently, it was like something about what are the like focusing on the little things, the little white lies that you say. So we're always like paying attention to each other. We're very intentional about not getting offended whenever each of us will be like, hey, you're kind of lying there, you know, even with our son, like, hey, don't lie to him. Don't even like white lie to him. So I think whenever we started implementing like everything we were hearing, it was like this snowball effect of us just continuing and us growing together, but we were also growing independently. Like we had to grow independently first.
Yeah.
And now we're just both so secure in the relationship that we don't have to sit here and worry about each other. And we can honestly be super raw and open about what's going on in our lives.
Well, and I would love to back up just for a second. When I first got that job and we were living at what I like to call the little shack on the wrong side of the train tracks, because it was this tiny, ugly house right next to the train tracks. So you couldn't keep anything on the windowsill. When the train went by, everything would just fall off. And I remember being in that season. This was right after, so we lost everything. We went into business together. I quit my job. We went into business together when I was 20. She was 19. No, she was 20 at this point. And when we lost everything, we didn't have any skills. We didn't have any money. We didn't know what we were doing. And we ended up losing everything, moving into a basement. And that's an entire story in its own right. But I remember coming out on the other side of that into this job. I hated the job. I cried every single day I left the house because I was breaking my body. I was working hours and hours, but I refused to let my family go without again. I said, it doesn't matter what I have to do at this point in time, because I still wasn't close to the Lord. I was willing to just give away everything to make sure that they were taken care of. Like I was willing to lay myself down for them. And I just remember in this time, and this is what I want you to talk about, was that season, because in that season, what ended up happening was I just became this hardened person. I basically became my father. I remember growing up, I asked my mom, I said, Mom, why does my dad not love me? Because he never told me he loved me. He never told me he was proud of me. He never hugged me. He never did any of the things that you need to actually feel complete as a person. And she said, I can't believe you would say that. Don't you see how much he works? Don't you see how he's breaking his body and he's putting a roof over your head? Don't you have food and an Xbox in your room? And so when I was married and I was in that same position, that's who I became, because I was modeling what I saw. And that almost destroyed our marriage.
Yeah, we had very similar parents. I feel like, but I don't know. It's really funny how similar our parents were, because my dad was a lot like that too. And so my goal was to not have that. I was like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be someone who's kind of cold and doesn't really I don't want to have that in my relationship. Like I just had this dream, and I always kind of feel this way about friends and stuff too. Like I just want things to work. Like I want people's relationships to work. I want them to thrive. I want them to be happy. And so in that moment, after we got married, like things started changing. We were living together. And from that point forward, I just remember one night I was sitting on the floor and he had been working all these hours in the hot. So I was basically getting none of my number one love language. I don't know if you know what the love languages are.
Yes.
But I was getting no physical affection at all, because he was hot all day. And whenever he came home, he didn't want like nothing.
Right.
So I was just sitting on the floor one day and we were having a strong discussion. And I was like, I need this from you. Like, I can't explain this need. And he didn't understand it then. I tried to get him to read the 5 Love Languages book, but he wouldn't do that back then. And I was like, I can't explain this, but I need it from you. And he said, I'm sorry, but I can't be that person for you. Like, that's not who I am.
Yeah, and I remember that moment so vividly, because looking back on that now, is I could only imagine being in your shoes. Is in that moment, there's not only the firm reality of what you're living in, but it's like the death of a dream, the death of the dream of this relationship that you had been longing for, the person that you thought I was going to be in a moment. It was gone in seconds. And I just remember that there at this moment, there was really 2 things at play. It was 1, I was hot, but 2 was I didn't understand that she didn't feel loved by the way I felt loved. My number 1 at the time was acts of service. So her going to work, her cooking, or her doing anything made me feel loved. So I
Yeah.
didn't understand how it's like, how do you like, why do you need me to just hold you? Don't you
Right.
see that I'm working 16? I just worked 21 hours. Like, don't you see that I love you so much? I'm willing to do this.
Right.
But that's why it really is so important to unlearn what you know about loving yourself. And because, yes, the way that you feel loved is not the way that she'll feel
Right.
loved or he'll feel loved. You
Right.
have to learn how the other person feels loved. And when you start catering to them and how they feel loved, then they in return will start figuring out ways for you to
Yeah.
feel loved. But I
Yeah.
remember in that season that there was a moment that happened that where we were basically done. Like it was over. And I'm in my truck and I'm ready to leave. And that's a whole nother story. I had a truck that was more expensive than the house. So like stewardship, that one there. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't going right. But I remember I was sitting in the truck and she's standing in front of it and she's crying and she's keeping me from leaving. And I just in this moment, the Holy Spirit spoke to me again and he said, "You need her." And I
Mm.
said, "I need her." Because for the longest time, this now mind you, this is not 2 days after we got married after the honeymoon phase. Like, no, this is 3 years down the road.
Mhm.
Right.
And in this moment, I had to shed this lone wolf skin that I could do it all by myself. I could shoulder it all by myself and
Mm.
realize I need her. And as soon as I came to grasp with that I needed her, that's when things started to change. Because when you need somebody, the way that you need food, the way that you need water, the way that we're supposed to pursue the Lord, when you need somebody like that, then what do? You will do whatever it takes. And so that's it.
Wow.
Wasn't it? It took a long time. It did not happen immediately,
Mm.
but
That was the shift.
that was the shift. Yes.
Mhm.
Wow. 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 And it just reminded me of how women or wives are called the helper or the helpmeet. And so that we you play a very pivotal role in the life of your husband. And did you see a shift? You mentioned that was a shift. Brittany, did you see things start to change, or did you tell her this, Stephen, what God spoke to you, or
What ended up happening was I turned the truck off and then I stayed. And so in that moment is I told her that I would be there. I would stay. I wouldn't leave. And so she knew that it like we were all in. We were all in on this moment. We were all in on this time together. And I love what you said right there about being the helper, because once I realized that it took a long time because there was a lot of things I was working through. But I just remember for years before I quit my job, I would say for almost three years that she was watching church online. I wasn't. I wouldn't go to church. Like, I actively fought against going because I thought I knew everything because I read through the Bible one time. So I was like, I know everything that there is to know. And she legitimately, and I want to be an encouragement to you ladies that are listening to this, is my wife prayed down heaven for me. She prayed down heaven for me for at least 3 years, where it was prayer and prayer and more prayer. And I just honor her because when it
Amen.
didn't look as if anything was changing, she still prayed. When it felt as if nothing was changing, she still prayed. When there was no physical affection coming to her in the way that she needed it, she still prayed.
I mean, the biggest thing I remember is just like, I wanted my son to experience church, be in church. So that was one of the biggest drivers for me trying to get us in church. He was like, "You can take him." He was like, and I did a couple times by myself. But for me, I didn't notice a big shift, honestly, after that, just because there was so much time that it took to even get to a point of like repairing to the place where we could just be like not roommates anymore. Because
right.
basically at that point, it felt like we were roommates. And if you know anything, like whenever you move in with your best friend for college or something like that, you start seeing a whole new side of them. You start fighting with them and all that stuff. So that's what it felt like at that point, was just a very slow and gradual. And you just kind of, it's weird because you kind of wake up one day and you're like, things are different now.
And it was really the fast track. So when this moment in front of the truck, I think that might have been 2014. No, it was probably 2015. So 2015 at this time. And it took almost 5 years. But in 2020, 2020 was especially once I quit that job, it was just rapid acceleration. It really was just an explosion because at this time, we're still back and forth on church. Like we had a church, but we didn't go all the time. But the one thing I knew how to do was just talk to the Lord. And for those of you listening, you go, well, I don't know how. It's like, is it thou shalt, like it's the King James version, is
Right.
no. How would you talk to your father?
Right.
And that's how I talk to him. Like,
Yeah.
Lord, I don't feel good today. I don't want to go to work today. Like this sucks. And he's big enough to handle your worries. He's big enough to handle your pain. He's big enough to handle your questions. And that's what it took for me to get to the point where in 2020, in June of 2020, where he calls me out of this job, where I felt I audibly heard him. I had worked from the same job for 5.5 years. And I worked my way up. I had no college degree, no experience, worked my way up from entry level up into management. And I was being looked at for a position that would have made close to $100,000 a year. And I thought that was it. I was like, oh, I'm about to make it. And in this moment, I'm in the warehouse over my team, and I'm in the mechanic shop, and I feel that I hear the Lord tell me audibly, like, you're done here. You're done in the job. And I this is the one time in my life where I feel I audibly heard him, because I actually looked around and searched around because I thought for sure somebody else was in there, and there was no one else in there.
Wow.
And when I started praying about it, and he said that you're done in the job, I told her, and I called one of our friends who has a business. And I told him, I said, I feel that the Lord's telling me to quit the job and go into business. And he said, well, if the Lord's telling you to do it, then why'd you call me? And it was just that blunt realness. And a practical step for anyone listening is, if you get a word from the Lord, if it's in seed form, be very, very careful who you tell it to.
Right.
Because if your family is the first people you want to run to, but those are the first people who are going to be scared for you. It's not that they're mean. It's not that they're unsupportive. It's that they're scared. They love you so much, they don't want to see you get hurt.
Yeah, they want to protect you.
Yeah.
Right. There's definitely a protectiveness. Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious, Brittany, both of you really, but I'd love to hear from Brittany first. Steven, you made a powerful statement that Brittany was praying. How did you say it? Praying what?
Praying heaven down.
Praying heaven down. And that's kind of a long time to pray and not see much going on. How did God help you in that season?
Yeah, I feel like if I look back at that season, it was just a season of basically surviving. Like, we had to kind of disconnect ourselves from each other in order to just live. Because if I just completely depended on what I was gaining from him, the affirmations I was getting from him, anything I was getting from him, then I would have been completely a mess. So during that time, I just feel like I was praying for this relationship that I kind of had a vision for whenever we first got together. Honestly, I feel like everybody has that vision. And I think that vision is accurate, but there's so many things that come into our life. There's so many daily decisions that come into our life that come to kind of tear down the walls of that vision. And I always like to say that I believe, at least, that marriage is like the most powerful relationship that God made on this earth. Yeah. So of course, that's going to be the thing that the enemy wants to try to tear apart, is like a great marriage. He's going to obviously go after that. And it's easy in this culture to do that.
Yeah.
So for me during that time, it was extremely difficult. I basically had no faith. And I just remember thinking, it's really not, if we're going to like end this thing, it's kind of when. But I guess I think we can both agree that there was years we just kind of held on for our son. I know there's a lot of relationships like that.
Yeah.
It just felt like we were holding on for him because that's what he'd seen his parents do. That's what I saw my parents do. They weren't happy for a lot of their relationship. So yeah.
And that's what I grew up with too. My mom and dad, they didn't even sleep in the same room. So it was this picture where every time that I saw them, my dad would be in one place in the house and my mom be in the complete opposite, like as far away from each other as they possibly could be. And I just remember them talking to me about marriage, and my dad would always tell me not to get married. And my mom, like both of them were talking to me about marriage, but it didn't make any sense because even in that there was no real relationship. I didn't see it. And in that time when she's praying, we were going to church kind of here and there. I still was not the head of the house. I was not the leader. And more times than not, she had to be like, for me, I just worked. I worked and I brought home money and that was it. Like I did nothing else. The rest of the time I was either playing video games or I was like I was almost as if I was single, even though I was not, I was not a good husband. I was not a good father. I want to make that abundantly clear if you're listening. And I'm fine with throwing dirt at myself because that's who I used to be. And that's the thing is so many times we look back on our past selves and we try to hide that. But look at one of the greatest apostles to ever live, and Paul. He everywhere he went, you know that there was somebody throwing dirt on his name because he was Saul. He was killing Christians, but he embraced it and he said, "In my weaknesses, that is where you find strength." So for me, is I throw dirt on myself all the time because I was not a good husband. I was not a good father, and I'm just so thankful that she prayed. She continued to pray for me. She continued to push. And then in 2020, when I came home and I finally started just consuming Transformation Church, we were listening to a series called Crazy Faith.
Ooh,
and I thought, hey, I got that. One of my
favorites. Go ahead.
Yes.
Continue.
So I said, hey, I got that. That's what my necklace is, Crazy Faith. But
nice.
I just remember I heard the first sermon. I said, hey, this is me. I'm walking on water. I need this. And going back to what I even said in the beginning is just testing it, just trying it, is when Peter stepped out of the boat, he didn't know he was going to walk on water. All Jesus said was, yes, come. So he had to try it.
And he didn't even know 10 steps in that he wouldn't just like
sing.
He did. He looked down and he started singing. He said, oh no, like I made a mistake here.
But that's the thing is he didn't, it says that he started to sink. It didn't say that he sank.
Right.
And I think that there's this beautiful distinction because starting to sink is he feels himself sinking. He says, Lord, save me. And so Jesus just reached out his hand. He says, oh, you have little faith. But the thing is, he didn't sink. He wasn't at the bottom of the ocean and Jesus had to go swim down and get him. He started to sink. And it's that beautiful introspective of knowing, where are you? Are you in the same place you were a few steps ago? Are you not?
Yeah.
Wow. I feel like I could talk to you guys for hours. You all have a beautiful, beautiful marriage. And I just really appreciate how you shared transparently and authentically using your word, because the reality is a lot of people are going through it, and not just in marriage. It could be just in any area of life. And just that reminder of stick with it. You know, I almost feel like, okay, I don't know the mind of God, so in no way I'm claiming that one, but that God gave me a word because he knew y'all are going to be tested, and like you might only have that word to hold on to. And to see how, you know, it took a long time, but how he is so faithful and has transformed your marriage is beautiful. And I want to actually wrap up with a couple questions. One is addressing something, Brittany, you said. You made a powerful statement about how the enemy will attack marriage. And I'm wondering what you all do now. Maybe you don't even do it intentionally, but what do you all do now to sort of to safeguard your marriage now from the enemy?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think right now it's kind of a lame answer, I guess, if you think of it in the facet of like fancy. But honestly, every single day, like the thing that helped our marriage was not us working on our marriage. It was us working on ourselves. Like, that's what I want people to understand. Like, if I could speak to the single people right now, there's two things I would say. Work on yourself. Become the person that, like, write down everything that you want from your partner in the future. Like, the person you want to marry. There's so many people that we've met lately who are like, I'm believing for my husband this year. Write it down. Everything you want. Like, everything you want. And then write down a list right beside it of everything he would want. And literally just become that person. Like, what does he want from a wife?
Yeah.
And then the second thing I would say is just understand, which it goes with that, is just like we had to start working on ourselves. Like we had to understand that everything is not an attack. Like if he comes to me and says, you know, I noticed that you had this issue, it's not an attack. Like we used to just have these long, I just remember long
conversations.
It was just almost every day was like a long conversation about who did this wrong and what it was they could do differently. And neither of us ever changed because we walked away from it thinking they're going to change their part of what I said. Like both of us thought that. And neither of us changed our part. So eventually we come back to the same conversation and we were sitting there saying, why do we keep going through this loop? Like, why do we keep coming back to the same issue? It's because I wasn't taking responsibility for my part.
Yep.
So I just like, and I'm also going to God and like saying, like, you have to help me. I can't be who you need me to be. That's one of the most, I love to think of marriage. Like I said, I just love. And whenever I talk to single people, I'm like, you don't understand. Like you want to be single because it's this freedom, but there's so much more freedom in being with someone who supports you. And it's not just holding on. Like the marriages we grew up with, most of our parents just held on. It's very rare that you even hear about relationships now that are married that aren't just like holding on for whatever reason. Or just kind of roommates doing life together. And it's just, it's honestly really difficult to see, especially our generation. They just seem like they would be so much better off single because they don't actually get to see this depth. Because there's like phases to me. Like in my head, I see it as like this beginning excited love phase. And I even walked in whenever we came to Transformation Church for the first time and I was excited and in love with it. And then you get to this phase where it's like, okay, this is normal. Like, and normal can almost seem boring to a lot of people. And then you get to this phase where it's like this depth of love that's so hard to even explain until you've actually experienced it.
Yeah. And I think that it's really powerful what you're saying. I think that there's two things that I would love to say to that, which is one is to the single people is there's power in your singleness. There's power in it. Like there's people now that
there's a lot of work we could have done before we were together.
Amen.
That
but
would have made this a lot better.
There's people in our lives now that they're our age and they're well, I'm praying for my husband, I'm praying for my wife, I'm praying they come into my life, and my question to them is are you actually stewarding your single season? And when they ask me about that is when I say it is, are you intentionally seeking the Lord and letting him work on you? Because you have to allow him to work in those areas that you don't even want to work on. Because then you're not carrying anything into this marriage and expecting that person to fix you, because that's the worst thing that you could do. And I know when you were asking about like, what do you do? The one of the things before I get to that is I think that there's, and I used to hear this from what I like to call the seasoned saints or the older generation, is they used to say that, well, you're just in the puppy dog phase. You're just in the honeymoon phase. And for me, my marriage, my relationship now is so much better than the honeymoon phase ever was. So if they haven't got to that depth, and I don't want it to be this mystified thing where you have to be married for years and years and years to have it. That is not true. It's not about age. It's not about length of marriage. You can have it now. And what that looks like is, for me, is every single day I wake up and I pray. Before she's awake, my number one relationship is not her. My number one relationship is not her. She's second. My number one relationship is to the Lord. So what that means, I wake up and I spend time with him. I'm intentional with him. I sit there and I have that same intentionality that I do with her, with him. I pray. I spend time with him. I read his word. I sit there and I get intentional, deep conversations with him. I talk about how I feel. I talk to him all day. I seek him first. Because in a real sense of the word, we talk about Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and everything else will be added unto you. But seeking him first, and if it's everything else, if you're seeking him first, then you'll have an abundance of love, joy, peace, patience, self-control, kindness. And what are those things? Fruits of the Holy Spirit. But when I talk about that is what has made our marriage so strong, is this intentional time where both of us as individuals go and we have a real relationship with the Lord on our own. I don't know about you, but we have some friends that they only come around with another friend.
Yeah.
So with that being said, is they only will come around with another friend. And I don't want that to be my relationship with the Lord. I don't want to just show up and talk to the Lord when it's me and her. I want her to go be alone with him. I want to be alone with him.
Right.
And for us to grow closer to him, because then we can grow closer together, because it talks about two fleshes being made one. And the way that you do that is by keeping God first. And that's what we've had to do to pursue. And that's how our marriage stays strong.
Mm-hmm. I think just to put it into a point is we come together already whole, not looking for each other to do anything, and anything each other does on top of that, which we do plenty for each other, is just like the whipped cream on top of the Chick-fil-A cookies and cream milkshake.
And I think in a real practical sense, yes. And I think in a real practical sense is when you go and you're alone with God, he starts revealing things that you need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And so because people want to, well, what's the best self-help book? What can I do to work on me? It's like, ask the Lord.
Yeah.
He knows you. Yeah, he'll show you. He knows the numbers of hairs on your head. He knew you before you were born. He's closer than your own breath. So if you want to ask somebody, instead of reading a book, ask him, or read the Bible, both.
Yeah.
And when he starts revealing those things, is don't say, well, I'll work on that later. Mm-hmm. It's taking those obedient steps now. Obedience is greater than sacrifice. That's what Samuel says. So obeying, starting to work on you, because there was so many bombshells, landmines in our marriage that I was carrying, that she was carrying, that if we expected her to be the bomb expert and defuse it, we would have blown this thing up a long time ago.
I'm just gonna let that all sink in for folks. That was amazing. And I'm just connecting with it so much because that's been my life for the last several years, is build intimacy with God. He is the perfect therapist, the perfect counselor,
Amen.
perfect parent. And that's not to say don't pursue counseling or therapy outside. Yep. I'm a proponent of that, but just that, as you said, there's a popular phrase nowadays, Jesus plus therapy, right? But he will reveal things to you and highlight areas in your life that need to grow and need to change. So to summarize, seek first. I love that. That's been a verse I keep hearing over and over again. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. I want to close with this question. This is the question that I ask every single couple on here. The name of the podcast is, as if you remember, is Heartbeats.
Heartbeats.
So I'd love for you all to share, each of you, what's something your spouse does that makes your heart beat. And this is not a children's podcast, so you can be as honest as you want. No, but whatever you want to say.
No, you go first.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
I think it's her intentionality with me. And what I mean by that is what makes me feel the most love now, because my number one love language for a long time was acts of service. But now it is actually, I believe it's shifted. I believe that number one is quality time. And the way that looks now, this is actually a really interesting question, because this is a different answer than I expected to give. But the way that it looks now is the quality time that we spend together talking about the Lord. Where, because, and like I said, this is.
No, how am I supposed to follow that up?
Well,
I say the same thing.
Well, what I mean is, there's so many nights here recently, because we feel as if we're walking on water. He told us to shut down a business that was making $1 million, and it's been just enough every month. And like, we have not gone without, but it feels as if, one step and we off this thing, like we're off the cliff. But, and I'm not saying that to say that, to be a sob story, but this is sometimes where he calls you to. Paul talks about being content with much, content with little. And so the conversations that her and I have, we typically will read a devotional, and then we try to go to bed by 9 o'clock. But there's been so many days we're up till midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and we're just spending that time talking about the Lord. It's it's this deep communication, and it's deepening my relationship with the Creator. And that gives me, I feel so fulfilled in that. And the way that we talk on this podcast is how we talk to one another. This is not a persona that we put on. This is who we are.
Right.
And that's what I think what makes my heart beat most, is seeing her be a strong woman of God, being someone who is strong, who could be very independent, because for a long period of her life, she had to fight, she had to scrap, she had to hustle. But now to watch her lean in and lay and rest in the Lord and be still when it doesn't feel good, when it's much easier to go and do what you know, to watch her do that, and then us have deep conversations about Bible verses, about devotionals, about who he is in our lives as individuals. I think that is what makes my heart beat most at this time.
Yeah, for me, I believe I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I believe that now that I have that love language basically filled up all the time of just physical affection, it went from sometimes none at all for like days at a time to now every day it's filled up. I feel like I appreciate so much more now the service aspect. I mean, the way that he like just takes care of things, I'll be like, things will just like become done, like laundry will just be done, and I'm just like, who is this magician like doing all this stuff, and he's just doing it in the background. And when he left the house today, I was like, okay, I have to do all this stuff because he does so much. Like the laundry will be done, I'll have water filled up in my water bottle before the gym, my food is made for me, and it's just like he's doing it, and he's not holding any. Like, I've never heard, I do all this for you, can't you just do that one thing? It's like, if I ask him to do one more thing, he'll still do it. And that's what I appreciate so much now, is just those acts of service.
Well, and it's because I'm getting close to the Lord. I want to be like Jesus. And two things that the Lord does is, A, he doesn't keep tallies of wrongs. And two is you can't earn it.
But it's also, I think, easy for us, even whenever we're in the position that we're in now, it's easy to begin to just, it's not hard. It is hard to do all of those service acts.
It's simple.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's constant. Like he's constantly doing things. So it can be a thing where if you're constantly serving and you're not feeling like you're being served as much as you're serving, you can begin to feel like, man, I'm just worn out. I just am overwhelmed by doing so much, and you're not doing much at all. But he'll just do it, and he won't say anything.
And I think the honestly, the craziest thing when I look back on what you're talking about, one of the craziest things is I remember we did the 5 love languages test years and years ago. And my very last one was physical touch, physical affection. And hers was number 1. And we took it recently, and I think physical affection is my number 3. So it's gone way up. And the reason why that is because I had to die to myself every day. I had to pick up my cross and follow the Lord. And I had to, what that meant was loving my wife, holding my wife. This is not for the men out there that are confused. It's like, what does that mean? Physical affection is that it does not mean having to have sex with your wife all the time. It's like, no, just holding her hand, holding her, allowing her to feel safe in your arms, like just being there for her. And it's like, well, I don't like that. I want to, well, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. Sorry, because I didn't like it. I did not like it. I didn't want to do it, but I did it for her. And that's where, now that my number 1 is quality time, since I always feel filled up, I'm more than willing to always serve. There's no tally. There's nothing that if she asked me to do something right now, I would go and do it. There's so many times where there'll be an ingredient missing from one of our meals, and I'll just go and get it. She doesn't have to tell me to. She doesn't have to beg me to like she used to. I just go do it because I already am filled up.
And he means by missing, he means we don't have it at the house. He's got to physically get in the car.
Go to the grocery store.
Right. You don't got to go to the pantry or the fridge. Like he's got to leave and go get it. And he's done that several times recently.
I love that. I love your all's story. I love your marriage. I'm excited to see what God does with you all this year and the years to come, and how he's going to continue to use you all to remind people that God does miracles. The little bits that I saw on on your social media platforms. That's something that you're big about speaking on is like, God comes through. So
Yep.
and you guys really are a testament of that. You're literally living that out as we speak. And I think what I'm also just so blessed to hear about is, we touched on it before, but man, I say this to my students. I'm a teacher, a high school teacher, and I said this to my students recently. If you're feeling down and out, I want you to know this is a season. This is a season, right? And sometimes we get so stuck in what we see and hear in the natural. And like that season where you were praying and praying and praying and you didn't see anything changing or happening. And it's a season though, and we lose our hope. Not the fluffy hope, but the hope in God, in Christ, and his ability to transform and change things around when we think this is it. This is my life. And if you are in Christ, your hope is in him. He can change things around in a second. My best friend Jess, who's been on this podcast, she says, and I probably quoted this already, it can look one way one day and completely different the next. And God can change things around. And you all are, yes, you all are living testimonies that, maybe you're going through hell right now, but if you are in Christ, your hope is in him. He's committed to you. Like, talk about a perfect spouse. He's committed to you, so he can change and transform things in a millisecond. But keep seeking after him, keep pursuing him. He's going to walk with you. And one more thing I got to add on that I'm just, you all didn't have great marriage models.
No.
But the Holy Spirit is a perfect teacher.
Amen.
And I'm not saying he didn't use people or resources, right, to help you all. But at the end of the day, you all have a beautiful marriage that's just going to continue to grow because the one who's guiding you is the Holy Spirit. So, I could go on. But you all, this has been such a treat for me. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives and allowing your son to watch TV for a while so we could chat. And I'm just excited to hear and see what he continues to do with the Pembertons. So
yeah, just to add on to what you were saying, like, this is honestly, like he said, we're really raw and we're really open, just because I'll tell you why after, but this is honestly like one of the most difficult seasons in our lives as far as trusting in him. Like, we came to this place with no plan and we're serving God. Like, we need to work a business. We need to build something. We need to do something practical.
Right.
And it's so hard to stay out of practical, to stay out of your own head. And we just love telling people that because we want them to see the other side.
Yep.
Like, when it happens for us, you will see it and you'll remember this moment. And that's why we like to tell people where we are, like, especially right now, because we don't want people to feel sorry for us. We want people to feel the same excitement we do. And it's not always excitement. The other night I was on my face crying. Like, it's hard. It's difficult in a season where you're completely reliant on him. So just, I wanted to add to that encouragement that it's just a moment in time.
Yep.
It's just a moment in time.
And two things from me is, one, I just want to thank you for what you do. We need more teachers like you. And I'm not in your classroom. I don't know how you teach them kids, but I'm just thankful that there is a Christ-led woman that's sitting there and teaching kids. We need more people like you. So thank you. And then two is, don't mislabel a moment. Don't mislabel a season. because what you think is your darkest, deepest, worst moment of your life, God is using to set up the best times in your life. What I thought was the end of my life, whenever I got that speeding ticket, ended up becoming the wife who has been with me ever since. Like, there's blessings in what we feel is pain.
Yeah.
And and at the end of the day, whether you believe him or not, is go back to the word and just remember who he says you are. Hold true to who he says you are, because his word is perfect. And so at the end of the day, is holding firm to what he's called you to, who he says that you are. Each and every one of you listening is a son and a daughter of the King. That means you're royalty. You are meant for great things. You are not meant to be impoverished. You're not meant to continue to suffer. Suffering is temporary,
Right.
but there's an everlasting life on the other side of this. And just know that there's purpose in your pain, and there is a reason for the season that you're in, and that the life that God is leading you into is going to be a life of power and provision in a way that you don't understand or experience, or maybe never experienced. But just know that there is a reason for it, and just don't mislabel it, because he's using it.
Yeah.
Woo! I'm receiving that myself. No, thank you all so much, and for giving of your time. And I'm excited to, like you said, Brittany, see you all on the other side, and praise God with you for the testimony that he is literally working out right now.
Yep.
So, anyway,
Thank you so much for having us.
you.
We're so appreciative.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
This was such a treat for me. So, you all have a good evening. We'll be in touch, and talk to you guys soon. Thank you. All right, y'all. We made it to the part of the podcast where I share my heartbeat, which is, what did I sense God speaking to me as I heard Steven and Brittany's story? And for me, it's a phrase you heard Steven use: crazy faith, y'all. Well, he didn't say y'all, but it's crazy faith. And crazy faith, I'm learning as I, go through life. Crazy faith is not about believing for something really crazy to happen. It's not faith for faith itself. It's not believing for something crazy just because, oh, okay. If we hear a lot about manifesting things today. And I'm okay with people using that word if it's grounded in, what did God say? And you heard Steven and Brittany talk a lot about how God spoke to them. And that's where ultimately faith stems from, is what did God speak? And speaking through his word, speaking through a clear thought in our heads, and speaking through a picture, perhaps. But it's grounded in, what did God say first? And I want you to think about, what are some things God has spoken to you? Maybe you haven't seen them come to pass. Maybe you're waiting on God still. But I often believe, as I said during the conversation, that God will give you a word because he knows it's going to be tested, and you need to hold on to that word to go through what you're going to go through. And on the other side is beauty. On the other side is deliverance. On the other side is breakthrough. On the other side is a life you never imagined. And I've seen that play out in my own life. I'm continuing to see that play out in my own life. What I love is that it wasn't just one time. Oh yeah, God spoke to me here. No, they're actively, continually living out a life of crazy faith, a life of trusting God to do big things in their life, not just for the sake of big things, but because he said, I will provide for you. I will take care of you. I love you. That's the heart of our God, is I will provide. I will take care. So if he gives a word, you can trust him and take it to the bank. All right. So crazy faith. Take some time to reflect. What are the things God has spoken to you? What are the things he's planted on your heart? Desires that you could not have put there yourself, things that you actually can't make happen. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't steps you can't take, but ultimately speaking, God's the one that has to open the door. He's the one that has to bring the breakthrough. He's the one that has to bring the wisdom. So I want you to really soak in the crazy faith of the Pembertons. And I love, oh my goodness, I love what Brittany said at the end, where she was like, listen, we're telling you guys this stuff right now because you're going to see the other side. You're going to see God come through for us. You're going to see him lead us and direct us and open the way for us. And he's going to do that for you. He's going to do that for me. And so get excited, be expectant. And I think Steven said it well. The heart of crazy faith, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Let's put it all in the right place. Seek first his kingdom, believe what he said, and watch him work. So I love you all. Have an amazing day and can't wait to be back with you for another amazing conversation on the Heartbeats podcast.
You are my dream. Yeah. There's no me without you. You are my dream. Yeah. You're what dreams are made for. You are my dream. We're a three-strand cord. When I saw you, my heart skipped a beat.
When I saw you, my heart felt complete. Yeah.
But I wasn't ready to speak.
So I took the first word I was ready to greet.
But God knew
Shot my
we
shot,
were
babe.
meant to be.
I knew we were meant to be. Yeah. We were meant to be. Yeah. We were meant to be.